When my grandson was born, I wasn't allowed inside the hospital to see him. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. The security guard stopped me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not on the list," he said, looking at me like I didn't belong there. My heart sank. I couldn't believe it. There I was, standing outside the hospital, waiting to meet my first grandchild, and I was being treated like an outsider. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the words slipped out anyway. "What do you mean I'm not on the list?" The guard looked at his clipboard and repeated the same thing, his voice flat, unemotional. "You're not authorized." I felt the sting of those words. Not authorized? I whispered to myself, struggling to understand how I could be kept away from my own family. I knew Jessica, my daughter-in-law, was behind this. She had always been in control, always had her say in everything. I wasn't surprised, but the reality of it hit me harder than I thought it would. The hospital was quiet, the air thick with tension. I turned and walked back to my car, my mind racing. The first time I was supposed to hold my grandson, and I was being told no. I sat in my car, staring at the hospital doors, feeling a mixture of disbelief and anger rising in my chest. How could this be happening? How could my own daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms, do this to me? I had been there for her when she needed me, helping with the wedding, with the baby shower, with everything. And this was how she repaid me? I couldn't let this go. I just couldn't. The thought of never seeing my grandson, of being shut out from my son's life like this, was unbearable. I had to talk to Michael. I had to make him understand. But I knew what would happen next. He would make excuses. He always did. Jessica had this hold on him, a grip so tight that no matter how many times I had tried to speak up, he always sided with her. I don't know what it was, but it was as if he couldn't see how much it hurt me. "You're just too sensitive, Mom," he'd say. Or, "Jessica is just doing what's best for the family." But where was I in all of this? I was part of this family too. I had raised Michael, put in everything I had to make sure he had a good life, a happy life. And now, at a time when I needed to feel like I mattered, I was being dismissed. I had to do something about it. This wasn't just about a hospital visit. This was about standing up for myself, for my place in my own family. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone. There was no more time to waste. I needed to find out why I wasn't allowed in. Why was my presence suddenly such an issue? I didn't want to start a fight, but I knew it was inevitable. The walls I had tried to keep up for so long, to stay quiet and let things slide, were starting to crumble. It was time to face the truth. I called Michael. He picked up on the third ring, his voice calm, as usual. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" "Michael, why wasn't I allowed to see the baby?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" "At the hospital," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. The security guard stopped me. He said I wasn't authorized. There was silence. Then Michael spoke again, his tone still neutral. "Mom, it's just that Jessica wanted to keep it a small, private thing. She thought it would be better if it was just her, me, and a few others." "A few others?" I repeated, the anger starting to bubble up. "Michael, this is my grandson. I'm his grandmother. I should have been there. Why didn't you tell me?" He sighed, and I could tell he was trying to choose his words carefully. "It's not that simple. You know how Jessica is. She gets anxious about these things. She just wanted to make sure everything went smoothly." My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't about making things smooth. This was about control. Jessica wanted things her way, and if that meant pushing me aside, then so be it. And Michael, he just let it happen. He didn't even question it. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much it hurt. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I took a deep breath. And said, "I'm not just going to sit here and let this happen. There was a pause before Michael spoke again, his voice softer. What do you mean? I'm going to get to the bottom of this, I said, my voice steady now, more confident than I had felt in days. I'm not going to let her keep me from my family, from my grandson. It's time for me to stand up for myself. I could feel Michael's hesitation on the other end of the line. Mom, please don't do anything rash. I don't want you to cause problems. But it was too late. I had made up my mind. It wasn't just about a hospital visit anymore. It was about respect, about knowing that I mattered in my own family, about taking back the part of my life that had been stolen from me. And if I had to fight for it, then that's what I was going to do. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, I found myself sitting alone in my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hands, trying to find the right words to say. The conversation with Michael still echoed in my mind. How could he not see how wrong this was? How could he just sit back and let Jessica control everything? I had been there for him, for both of them, since the beginning. Now, I was being shut out of the one moment that mattered most, meeting my grandson. I couldn't let it slide. Not this time. I stood up, my hands trembling, and made my decision. I wasn't going to be passive anymore. I was going to make sure I had a place in my family, no matter what. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait any longer for Michael to give them to me. I grabbed my coat and left the house. The air outside was cold, the streets quieter than usual. I drove to the hospital, my mind racing. I had to see my grandson. I had to. The thought of him, just being there, without me, was unbearable. I parked the car and walked toward the entrance. My heart was pounding in my chest. As I approached the door, I saw the same security guard from the day before. He recognized me immediately, and I could see his face tighten as I walked toward him. Ma'am, he said, his voice as flat as it had been the day before. I'm sorry, but you're not allowed inside. I looked at him, my frustration building. I'm his grandmother. I have every right to see him. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it was clear that he wasn't going to listen. He stepped in front of the door, blocking my way. You need authorization from your daughter-in-law, he said, his tone firm. I felt a wave of heat rise to my cheeks. I've already tried that, I said, my voice colder now. She's not letting me in. The guard glanced at me for a moment, his eyes shifting. I'm sorry, ma'am, but those are the rules. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I couldn't believe my own family was doing this to me. I turned around and walked back to my car. It felt like everything had been ripped away from me. The sadness and anger churned inside me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely powerless. I couldn't just walk away this time. I had to do something, anything, to change the situation. I pulled out my phone and called Michael again. This time, I wasn't going to let him brush me off. It rang a few times before he finally answered. Mom? His voice was calm, too calm. Michael, I just went to the hospital, and they wouldn't let me in, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They said I need authorization from Jessica. There was silence on the other end. Mom, I told you, Jessica is just being careful, he said, his voice soft. She doesn't want to cause any drama. It's not personal. Not personal? I repeated, my voice rising. This is my grandson. How is this not personal? I'm sorry, Mom, Michael said, his voice starting to break. I don't know what else to say. I felt my chest tighten. You don't know what else to say? I've been here for you your whole life, Michael. And now, I'm being treated like a stranger in my own family. I'm not asking for permission to love my grandson. I'm asking for respect. There was another long pause. I'll talk to Jessica, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll see what I can do. I hung up, not waiting for him to say anything else. I didn't want promises. I wanted action. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit back and let this continue. If Michael wasn't going to stand up for me, then I would stand up for myself. I took a deep breath, my hands still shaking as I set my phone down. I couldn't keep going like this, feeling like I was being pushed out of my own family. Something had to change. I had to change it. The next morning, I showed up at the hospital again. This time, I didn't wait for permission. I walked straight to the nurse's station and asked for the room number of my grandson. The nurse looked at me with a slight frown but didn't ask any questions. "Room 312, she said, her voice polite but distant. I nodded and made my way down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I was going to see my grandson, no matter what. I reached the door to the room and paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. I knocked lightly before opening the door. There, in the corner of the room, was Jessica. She was sitting by the crib, holding my grandson in her arms. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. "I'm here to see my grandson," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm his grandmother. I have every right to be here." Jessica stood up quickly, her face flushing. "You're not welcome here," she said, her voice sharp. "You're not authorized to be here." "I don't need your permission," I replied, stepping into the room. "I'm his grandmother. I deserve to be here." Jessica looked at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. I could see the tension in her body, the way she was holding my grandson just a little too tightly. She was afraid. And in that moment, I knew I had won. I wasn't going to be pushed aside anymore. Not by her, not by anyone. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, taking a step forward. Jessica's eyes flicked to the baby in her arms, and for a moment, I saw something shift in her expression. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was fear. But whatever it was enough. I walked over to the crib, my heart full as I looked down at my grandson. He was so small, so fragile, but so perfect. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally where I was supposed to be. As I reached down to touch his tiny hand, I heard Jessica sigh. "Fine," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "You can stay. But don't expect me to like it." I didn't care. I was here. And that's all that mattered. I couldn't believe how much things had changed. The room felt different as I stood there beside the crib, watching my grandson sleep peacefully in front of me. The weight of the past few days hung heavy in my chest. Despite everything that had happened, I knew this moment was precious. It was the first time I had seen him up close, and he was everything I had imagined. His tiny fingers curled gently around mine as I reached into the crib, and for a brief moment, everything felt right. But as I stood there, looking at him, the anger that had been building inside me didn't go away. It simmered just below the surface. Jessica's coldness, her refusal to let me see him, was still fresh in my mind. I couldn't understand how someone who had been part of this family could shut me out so completely. I looked at her as she stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, watching me with a mix of frustration and reluctance. She hadn't said much since I walked in, but I could tell she was still furious. And yet, there was something else. A flicker of doubt. Maybe she didn't expect me to stand up for myself like this. Maybe she thought I would just take it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to let her treat me like this. Slowly, I turned away from the crib and looked at her, my voice steady, but full of resolve. "You don't get to decide who gets to be a part of this family," I said, the words sharper than I meant them to be. Jessica flinched, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just kept her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. She looked at me for a long time. Like she was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. This was about more than just a hospital visit. It was about respect. It was about family. "You may be his mother, but that doesn't mean I don't have a right to be here," I continued. "I raised Michael. I've been here for everything. I'm not going to just disappear now." Jessica shifted uncomfortably but didn't say anything. It was clear she didn't know how to respond. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't going to let her control this. I wasn't going to let her push me aside like I didn't matter. Slowly, I turned back to the crib and looked at my grandson again. He was so tiny, so innocent, and yet he had already become a pawn in Jessica's game. I couldn't let her do this. I couldn't let her take away everything that mattered to me. I looked at him and felt a surge of love and determination. I'm going to be here for you, no matter what, I whispered to him, even though he couldn't hear me. You're my family. And I'm not going anywhere. I turned back to Jessica, my voice calm but firm. I'm not going to fight with you. But I'm not going to let you treat me like this either. Jessica took a deep breath, as if trying to calm herself. You don't understand, she said, her voice quieter now. I'm just trying to keep things in control. You don't know how hard it's been for me. For us. I know, I said, my voice softer now, but with a note of sadness. I know it's not easy. But this isn't the way to do it. You can't just push me out. I won't let you. There was a long pause as we stood there, the tension thick between us. I knew Jessica was frustrated, but I could see something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just anger or annoyance. It was fear. Fear that she might lose control. Fear that maybe she wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. I don't want to fight with you, I said finally, my voice softer, calmer. But I need you to understand. I'm part of this family. And I'm not going anywhere. Jessica looked at me for a long time, her lips pressed into a tight line. Then, finally, she nodded. I get it, she said quietly. But don't expect me to just welcome you with open arms. I don't expect that, I replied. I just expect respect. That's all. There was silence in the room for a few moments, and then Jessica walked over to the crib, her movements stiff. She stood there for a moment, looking down at the baby, before turning back to me. I'll let you stay, she said, her voice still guarded. But don't think this changes anything. I didn't care what she thought. I wasn't here to fight her. I was here for my grandson. I was here for my family. Thank you, I said, my voice steady, though I knew things weren't going to be easy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally standing my ground. I had taken control of the situation, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I walked over to the crib and looked at my grandson once more, my heart full of love and hope for the future. No matter what Jessica or anyone else tried to do, I was going to be a part of this family. And nothing was going to take that away. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. It wasn't as if everything was suddenly perfect. Jessica was still distant, still cold, but there was a shift in the air. I could feel it. Every time I stepped into the room, she didn't meet my eyes the way she used to. And when I looked at Michael, he still avoided my gaze, as if he didn't know where he stood. But that didn't matter to me anymore. I had made it clear where I stood. I was a part of this family, and nothing was going to push me out again. I spent the next few days at the hospital, visiting my grandson whenever I could, holding him in my arms and watching him grow. The little moments, like the way his tiny fingers would wrap around my finger or the way he would make soft cooing sounds when I spoke to him, were enough to remind me why I was fighting so hard. No one could take this from me. But there were still times when I felt the weight of Jessica's disapproval. I could sense it in the way she moved, in the way she avoided speaking to me unless she had to. It wasn't just the hospital room where I felt it. Even at family gatherings, I could see it in her eyes. She had a way of making me feel small, as if I wasn't even really part of the family, as if I was just an inconvenience. I tried not to let it bother me. I really did. But it was hard. I had always been the one to keep the family together, the one who made sure everyone showed up for birthdays, holidays, and everything in between. Now, it felt like I was being erased. The worst part was seeing Michael, my own son, acting like he couldn't stand up for me. The silence between us was deafening. He had always been a quiet person, but now it felt like he was actively choosing not to speak up, not to take a side. That hurt more than anything. He wasn't the same person he used to be. I missed the days when we could talk without all the tension. When I would tell him about something funny that happened during my day, and he would laugh. When he would ask for my advice on things that mattered to him. Now, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. One evening, a week after my confrontation with Jessica, I invited Michael over for dinner. I had spent the day preparing his favorite meal, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, and a side of green beans. It wasn't much, but it was a small gesture, a way for me to show him that I still cared, that I still wanted things to go back to the way they used to be. When Michael walked in, I could see it in his eyes, the hesitation, the uncertainty. He didn't know how to act around me anymore. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice sounding distant. "Smells good in here." "I thought we could have a nice dinner," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "Just like we used to." He nodded, but there was no warmth in his response. We sat down at the table, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing second. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was going on. "Michael," I said, my voice steady but firm, "why are you acting like this? Why can't you just be on my side?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding mine. "It's not that simple, Mom." "It is that simple," I replied, my frustration bubbling up. "You're my son. I've always been there for you. I've given everything for this family. And now, I'm being shut out." Michael looked at me for the first time all evening, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "I don't want to take sides," he said quietly. "I don't want to cause problems between you and Jessica." "But you're letting her control everything," I said, my voice breaking. "You're letting her push me away, and you're not saying anything." There was a long pause, and I could see that Michael was struggling with his words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do, Mom. She's my wife. I love her, and I don't want to hurt her. But I also don't want to lose you." My heart ached. It wasn't the answer I had wanted, but it was the truth. Michael was stuck in the middle. He was caught between the woman he had chosen and the woman who had given him life. And in the end, it was me who was paying the price. "I don't want to lose you either," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep being treated like I don't matter." Michael reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and familiar. "I don't know what to say, Mom. But I'll try. I'll talk to Jessica. I'll make her understand." "I don't want you to make her understand," I replied, squeezing his hand. "I want you to stand up for me. To stand up for what's right." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the son I once knew. "I will, Mom. I promise." After dinner, Michael stayed for a while, and we talked. We didn't solve everything, but for the first time in what felt like forever, we connected again. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As he left, he hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I love you too," I replied, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and sadness. As I closed the door behind him, I realized something. Things might never be the same. Jessica might never fully accept me, and Michael might always be torn between us. But at least I had tried. At least I had stood up for myself, for my family. And that was enough. The days after Michael's visit were filled with a strange mix of hope and tension. Jessica remained distant, but there was something different in the air. I could tell she was trying, in her own way, to avoid further confrontation, but I knew she wasn't done yet. It was almost like we were all walking on eggshells, waiting for the next move. And then, a few days later, it came. I had been spending my afternoons at the hospital, taking every opportunity to hold my grandson, to feel like a part of this family again. Even though Jessica's presence in the room still felt heavy, I didn't let it bother me. I was there for him, and that was all that mattered. But that day, as I walked into the hospital room, I could feel something was off. Jessica was sitting on the chair beside the crib, her arms crossed, her eyes focused on the floor. I walked in quietly, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace. As soon as she heard the door open, she looked up, but her gaze quickly flickered away. "You're here again," she said, her voice low and guarded. "I'm his grandmother," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I have every right to be here." Jessica didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the baby in the crib, her expression unreadable. I could see her fingers tapping nervously on her arm. "You're making things difficult," she finally said. "I'm not making anything difficult," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just here to see my grandson." "I don't know why that's such a problem." Jessica took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else. But instead, she stood up, her movements tense. "Look, I don't want to argue with you," she said. "But I need you to understand something. I'm his mother. I'm the one who gets to make the decisions for him." I could feel the anger building inside me, but I kept my voice calm. "I understand that you're his mother. But that doesn't mean you get to push me out of his life." For a moment, Jessica didn't say anything. She just stood there, looking at me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to figure out how to get out of this without losing control. And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about the baby. This wasn't just about Jessica trying to keep me away from my grandson. This was about power. It always had been. Jessica had always been the one calling the shots. She had always made the decisions, and Michael had always backed her up. But I was done with that. I wasn't going to let her control me anymore. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice quiet but filled with resolve. "I'm his grandmother, and I will be a part of his life, no matter what you or anyone else says." Jessica's eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might say something cruel. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away and walked toward the door. "Fine," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Stay. But don't expect me to be happy about it." I watched her walk out of the room, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had won. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I walked over to the crib and looked down at my grandson, his tiny hands curled around the edge of the blanket. He was so innocent, so perfect. And in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. I reached down and gently stroked his hair. "I'll be here for you," I whispered, my heart swelling with love. No matter what. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Jessica kept her distance, and Michael still hadn't spoken up. But things felt different. I could tell that Jessica was uneasy, that she knew I wasn't backing down. It was clear that my presence in the family had shifted the balance, and I wasn't going to let that go. I wasn't going to be the quiet, passive mother-in-law anymore. I was going to be heard. And that meant standing up for myself, for my rights as a grandmother. Michael finally came to visit me, and as soon as he stepped through the door, I could see the tension in his posture. He was nervous, unsure of how to handle the situation. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I said, not meeting his gaze. "But we need to talk." Michael looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been meaning to talk to you." I crossed my arms, leaning back in my chair. "You don't have to apologize. You just need to understand something. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to be pushed out of my grandson's life just because Jessica says so." Michael took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "I get it, Mom," he said. "I do. I don't know what to do. Jessica's been upset, and I don't want to make things worse." "Making things worse is letting her push me out," I replied, my voice firm. "I've been part of this family for years, Michael. I'm not some stranger. I'm his grandmother. And I deserve respect. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sadness. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I'll talk to her. I smiled softly, though my heart ached. Thank you, I said. That's all I'm asking for. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally made my son see the truth. Things weren't perfect. They might never be. But at least I had my place in this family. And that was all I needed. It had been a week since Michael promised to talk to Jessica. I didn't know if things had changed, but I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I spent the days at the hospital, visiting my grandson whenever I could. Each time I held him, I felt a sense of peace, as if nothing else mattered. But every time I saw Jessica, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me closely, waiting for me to make a mistake. Her eyes followed my every move, her posture stiff and defensive. It wasn't the warmth I had hoped for. I had hoped that with time, things would settle. But they didn't. The tension was still there, thick and uncomfortable, hanging in the air. Like a storm cloud. One evening, Michael came over to visit. He was quieter than usual, his eyes avoiding mine. I could tell something was on his mind, but he wasn't saying it. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice soft. How's everything going? I smiled, trying to make the atmosphere lighter. It's going well. I'm spending time with my grandson. He's growing so fast. Michael nodded, but I could see the strain on his face. He sat down across from me, looking like he was struggling with something. Mom, I've been thinking, he started, his voice hesitant. About what? I asked, not sure where he was going with this. About everything that's been happening, he said. I know things have been difficult with Jessica, and I've been talking to her. My heart skipped a beat. I had waited for this moment, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. And? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though I could feel my anxiety creeping in. I talked to Jessica about how you feel, Michael said. She's not happy with how things have gone. But she said she'll try to make things work. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Try to make things work? I repeated. That's it? Michael looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt. Mom, it's not easy. Jessica's been under a lot of pressure. She feels like she's losing control of everything. And I don't want to make things worse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you're telling me that after everything, you're still taking her side? The words came out before I could stop them. Michael's face faltered. It's not like that, Mom, he said, his voice quiet. I'm just trying to keep the peace. The peace? I asked, my voice rising now. What about me, Michael? What about my peace? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at his hands, clearly conflicted. I don't know what to do anymore, he whispered. I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to lose her either. I looked at my son, my heart breaking. He was stuck between the two women in his life, unable to choose, unable to stand up for the one person who had always been there for him. Michael, I've given you everything, I said, my voice quieter now. I've loved you. I've supported you. And now, when I need you, you can't even stand up for me. You're letting her push me out. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice choked. I don't know what else to do. I'm just trying to keep everyone happy. I shook my head, the tears threatening to fall. You can't make everyone happy, Michael, I said softly. You can't please everyone. You have to decide what's right. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, as if he were finally seeing the truth. I know, Mom, he said quietly. I know. I didn't know what else to say. I had hoped for so much more, but I had to accept that this was where we were now. I couldn't force Michael to choose. I couldn't make him see what I saw. But that didn't mean I was going to stop fighting for my place in this family. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the silence heavy around me. I looked at the empty chair beside me, where my husband used to sit. I missed him more than I could put into words. He had always been the one to stand by me, to back me up when I needed it. But now, it was just me. Just me, and the memories of all the years we had spent together. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. The world outside was moving, people going about their business, and yet, I felt stuck. Stuck in a life that wasn't the one I had imagined. Stuck in a family that seemed to be falling apart, piece by piece. But I couldn't stay stuck. I couldn't let this destroy me. I had already lost so much, but I wasn't going to lose myself. I had to keep going. For myself. For my grandson. For the family I had built with my own hands. The next day, I went back to the hospital. I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew I had to be there. When I arrived, I saw Michael in the hallway, standing by the door to the room. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said softly when he saw me. "Can we talk?" I nodded, and we walked into the room together. "I've been thinking," Michael said, sitting down beside me. "I don't want you to feel like you're not part of this family. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter." I looked at him, surprised. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've been wrong," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I should have stood up for you. I should have seen how much you've done for this family." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to say that everything was going to be okay. But I couldn't. Not yet. "It's not enough, Michael," I said quietly. "You've been choosing her over me for too long. I can't just forget that." He looked at me, the guilt in his eyes so strong that I could almost feel it. "I know," he whispered. "But I'm going to make it right. I'm going to make sure you're a part of this family, no matter what." I wasn't sure if I could believe him. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things could change. Maybe there was still a chance for us. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what had been broken. I didn't expect things to change overnight, but there was a noticeable shift in the air. Michael had come to see me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the man I had raised. He had promised to fix things, but there was still a part of me that wasn't sure. I needed to see action, not just words. Over the next few days, things seemed to settle, at least on the surface. Jessica remained distant, but she wasn't actively trying to push me out anymore. It was like walking on a tightrope, with each step unsure and fragile. I spent more time with my grandson, holding him in my arms, feeling his tiny fingers grip mine. It was the only thing that made the uncertainty fade, even if just for a moment. But the tension between Jessica and me still lingered. I could feel it when we exchanged glances, when we spoke in short, strained sentences. It wasn't the warmth I had hoped for, but it was better than the coldness I had faced before. Michael continued to visit, and each time, the awkwardness between us seemed to lessen just a little. But there were still unspoken words between us, still something that hadn't been fully addressed. I could tell that he was trying, but I didn't know if he truly understood the depth of what I had gone through. And Jessica, she was still a wall I couldn't climb. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I knew I had to talk to her again. There was no more avoiding it. I couldn't live in this uncomfortable silence forever. As I walked into the living room, I found Jessica sitting on the couch, flipping through her phone. She didn't look up when I entered, but I could feel her awareness of me. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady but firm. She looked up, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" I sat down across from her, taking a deep breath. "We need to talk," I said. "About everything." There was a long pause as Jessica looked at me, her fingers still holding the phone, but her attention was now on me. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice flat. "I'm just trying to keep things in control." I shook my head. "You don't control everything, Jessica," I said. "Not anymore. She frowned, her gaze sharp. What do you mean by that? I'm not going to be pushed aside any longer, I said. I'm his grandmother. I'm part of this family, and I'm not going to sit quietly while you make all the decisions. Jessica's jaw tightened, and I could see the anger bubbling up in her eyes. I don't need you to tell me how to raise my son, she said, her voice rising slightly. I'm just trying to protect him, protect our family. Protect him? I repeated, feeling a surge of emotion. By keeping me away? By pretending I don't matter? Jessica stood up abruptly, her face flushed with frustration. I'm doing what's best for everyone. I'm keeping things simple. Simple? I said, my voice growing stronger. You're trying to control everything, and you're using your son as an excuse. Jessica took a step back, her expression changing for a moment. For the first time, I saw a crack in her facade. It was brief, but it was there. I don't want to fight with you, she said quietly, her voice wavering just a little. I never wanted this to be hard. Just what? I interrupted, leaning forward. Just keep me in my place? Jessica hesitated, her eyes flicking away, but this time, she didn't look away immediately. I didn't want things to be like this, she said, her voice quieter now. I didn't want to feel like I was losing control of my life. You're not losing control, I said, softer now. You're just not the only one who matters in this family. You can't push me out. Jessica swallowed hard, her eyes still not meeting mine. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice almost lost. I didn't know how to handle everything. I sat back, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had hoped for, but it was a step in the right direction. I'm not asking for everything, I said, my voice calm. I'm just asking for a place. A place in my grandson's life. A place in this family. Jessica nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted, though I knew she wasn't entirely at peace with it. But for the first time, I saw something different in her. It wasn't the same coldness that had driven us apart. It was the beginning of something new. Slowly, Jessica sat back down beside me. I don't know how to fix everything, she said, her voice quiet, but I'll try. For him. For the baby. I reached out and put my hand on hers, feeling a connection that hadn't been there before. That's all I want, I said. A chance to be a part of his life. The tension in the room seemed to dissolve, but there was still so much left unsaid. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be more moments of uncertainty, more times when the past tried to pull us back. But this was a start. This was the first step towards rebuilding what had been broken. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us yet. The days that followed Jessica's hesitant apology were filled with a new sense of cautious optimism. The air between us was no longer as thick with tension, though the cracks in our relationship were still visible. It was as if we were both walking around fragile glass, afraid to disturb the uneasy peace that had settled. Michael had kept his word and, though things weren't perfect, he was making an effort to be more present. He started visiting more often, and each time he came, it felt like the distance between us was slowly closing. It wasn't easy, but I could see the change in him. One afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, watching the sunlight filter through the window, when I heard the doorbell ring. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there was Michael, holding a small bouquet of flowers. Hey, Mom, he said, his voice softer than usual. I brought you these. I smiled, a little taken aback by the gesture. Thank you, Michael. What's the occasion? No occasion, he said, shrugging. I just wanted to bring them to you. I invited him inside, and we sat down at the kitchen table. There was still an awkwardness between us, but it was different now, more comfortable, less strained. Michael looked at me for a moment, as if he was working up to saying something. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, he said, his voice quiet. I know things haven't been great, but I just want you to know that I'm on your side. I don't want you to feel like you don't matter to me. I felt a lump form in my throat at his words. I had spent so many nights wondering if he truly understood how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed for this family. And hearing him say it, finally acknowledging my feelings, meant more than I could express. You matter to me too, Michael, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I just want to feel like I'm part of things again. Like I'm not invisible. Michael nodded, his eyes sincere. I know, Mom. And I'm sorry it's taken me this long to really see it. The sincerity in his eyes was something I hadn't seen in a while, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe things would improve. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, I reflected on everything that had happened. The journey had been long and painful, but there was something changing in me. I wasn't the same woman I was when this all started. I had been knocked down, yes, but I was getting back up, piece by piece. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Jessica was still a challenge. She still held a power over Michael, and I wasn't sure if that would ever change. But for the first time, I felt like I had a voice again. I wasn't just the background character in my own life. I was fighting for my place in this family, and I wasn't backing down. The following week, things seemed to shift even further. Jessica and I had another awkward interaction at the hospital. She was sitting in the corner of the room, and for a moment, I considered just leaving, letting her have her space. But then, I remembered what Michael had said. I couldn't keep letting her control the narrative. I had every right to be there, to be a part of my grandson's life. I walked up to her, trying to keep my emotions in check. Jessica, I said, my voice steady but firm. She didn't look up at first, but I could see her shoulders tense. We need to talk. She glanced up at me, her eyes wary. What now? I want to be a part of this family, I said, not backing down. I'm not going anywhere. I'm his grandmother. And I deserve to be here. Jessica's face softened, just a little, but I could still see the tension in her posture. She was reluctant to admit it, but there was a shift in the way she looked at me. Maybe she finally understood that I wasn't the enemy. Maybe she realized that we both wanted the same thing in the end, to protect and love my grandson. She sighed, looking down at her hands for a moment before speaking. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't wanted, she said, her voice quieter now. I've been trying so hard to keep things together, to manage everything. I didn't know how to balance it all. I watched her for a moment, unsure of what to say. The walls between us had never felt so fragile. I get it, I said, my voice softening. I understand. But we have to figure this out, together. For him. Jessica nodded slowly, looking up at me. For him, she repeated. I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. This wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a start. And sometimes, that's all we need, a small step forward. The rest of the week was quieter. Jessica was still distant, but she didn't shut me out as much. I spent more time with my grandson, and with each visit, I felt like I was carving out my place again. Michael continued to make an effort to be present, and each time he came over, it felt like we were healing, slowly but surely. The cracks in our family were still there, but they didn't seem as deep as they once had. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that things could get better. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But with each step we took, I felt like we were moving closer to something better, something whole again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. And sometimes, that's all we need, to believe that the next chapter can be better than the last. It had been several weeks since that conversation with Jessica, and while things weren't perfect, they were undeniably better. There was still an unspoken tension, but I no longer felt like I was walking through a minefield every time I saw her. Michael had been making more of an effort, and while he wasn't fully the son I remembered, so quick to defend me, to stand by me, he was trying. That was enough for me, for now. One afternoon, as I walked down the hospital corridor to visit my grandson, I felt a slight shift in the air, as if everything that had been unsettled for so long was finally settling. I paused at the door to his room, taking a deep breath. There, standing by the crib, was Jessica. Her back was to me, and she seemed to be lost in thought, her hands resting on the edge of the crib, her head slightly lowered. For a moment, I just watched her. I wondered what she was thinking, whether she regretted her actions, or if she was still too wrapped up in her own fears to truly see the bigger picture. "Jessica," I said softly, announcing my presence. She turned quickly, her eyes widening in surprise. She was still on edge, and I could feel it in the way she stiffened when she saw me. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice flat, though not as cold as it used to be. "I'm here to see my grandson," I replied, my voice steady. I stepped into the room, feeling the quiet tension hanging between us. For a moment, we both just stood there, not knowing what to say. It had been so long since we had been able to have a normal conversation, and I wondered if that would ever happen again. "Jessica," I began, trying to break the silence, "we've both been through so much. I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'm here for our family." She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just looked at me, her eyes searching mine as if she were trying to figure out what I meant. I had no intention of pushing her too far, but I also wasn't going to let her control everything anymore. "I know I haven't been easy to deal with," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "I've made mistakes. I'm sorry, Carol. I've been trying to protect my family, but I haven't done it the right way." I took a deep breath, surprised by her words. They weren't what I expected, but they were a start. "Jessica, I've spent my whole life protecting my family too," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I know what it's like to feel like you have to do everything alone, to feel like you're fighting for control. But we don't have to fight each other. We can be a family, together." She looked at me, her gaze searching, and I saw the walls she had built up beginning to crack. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, the words coming out slowly. "I don't know if I can trust anyone right now." "I understand," I said, nodding. "Trust takes time. I'm not asking you to forgive me or to let me in overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here, that I care about you and Michael, and I want to be a part of this family." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I wondered if she would shut me out again. But then, she stepped forward, and I could see something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, vulnerability. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I just want to make everything okay, for Michael, for the baby, for all of us." "You don't have to do it alone," I said, my voice full of conviction. "We can help each other. We've both been through so much, but we don't have to keep fighting." Jessica's expression softened, just a little. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see that something was shifting. It wasn't a dramatic change, not a complete reversal, but it was something. A step forward. "I'm trying," she said, her voice quiet. "I really am." "I know you are," I said gently. "And I'm proud of you for trying." The room felt different now, the air lighter, as if the weight of the tension between us had lifted, if only for a moment. We both looked down at the crib, at the tiny baby sleeping peacefully inside. "He's going to need both of us," I said softly. "We can't keep pushing each other away." Jessica nodded, her eyes still fixed on the baby. "I know," she whispered. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This wasn't the resolution I had been hoping for. It wasn't the perfect family reunion I had imagined. But it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly moving forward, like the path ahead was no longer just full of obstacles and frustration. There was still a long way to go, and I knew there would be more bumps in the road. But I also knew that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. Jessica and I might never be the best of friends, but we didn't have to be. We just needed to work together, for Michael, for the baby, for the family we both cared about. As I stood there, looking at her, I realized that this was the first real conversation we had ever had about what really mattered. And I couldn't help but believe that, despite everything, there was still hope for us. We didn't have to be perfect. We just had to be real. And sometimes, that's all it takes.